Sir, I'm sorry, I cannot accept a watch or a ring as payment.
Nathaniel frowned. But either is worth far more than the price. I'm afraid I need coin, sir. Nathaniel searched his pockets once more. Nothing. He looked at the small wooden doll he had chosen for the little girl he had met earlier. I understand. Put it back. He was turning away when a gentle voice spoke behind him. I'll pay for it.
I'll pay for
Nathaniel turned. A young servant stepped forward and placed several coins on the counter. You don't even know me. She smiled. I don't have to. You should not spend your wages on a stranger. She glanced at the doll. Then think of it as being for the little girl. Before Nathaniel could even ask her name, she gathered her purchases and hurried away. She had no idea she had just paid for a duke. And Nathaniel knew he had to find her again. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, and it helps us keep bringing you more unforgettable Regency romance stories. Now, let's begin. Spring, 1817. A market town near Wycliffe Hall. The coin was refused a second time, and something in Nathaniel Ashford's chest tightened that had never tightened over money before. Sir, I'm sorry. I cannot accept a watch or a ring as payment. He set the gold watch back into his palm as though it had betrayed him. But either is worth far more than the price. I'm afraid I need coin, sir. The grocer's eyes flicked toward the small line forming behind him, a farmer's wife, a boy with a jug, a woman he did not look at closely enough to notice. I don't know you, sir. I can't say where these came from. What is a man, stripped of the proof that he is who he claims to be? Nathaniel searched his coat again, though he already knew the searching was useless. Nothing. Only the watch, the signet ring on his finger, the cravat pin at his throat, objects worth more than this entire shop's weekly trade, and not one of them worth anything at all in this particular moment. He looked down at the small painted doll on the counter, its blue dress, its careful little face, and beside it the packet of sweet biscuits he had added on impulse. The line behind him did not move. Someone shifted their weight. Someone else cleared their throat. How quickly does certainty become doubt when a room full of strangers begins to watch you fail? I understand, he said at last, quietly enough that only the grocer heard it. Put it back. He turned toward the door, and it was in the turning, in that single and finished step, that a voice stopped him. I'll pay for it. He looked back. A young woman had stepped forward from somewhere near the shelves of soap and thread, plainly dressed, a basket over one arm. Before he could speak, she had already set several coins upon the counter, precise and unhurried, as though she had done nothing more than settle her own bill. You don't even know me, he said. She looked at him, not shy, not uncertain, simply steady. I don't have to. You should not spend your wages on a stranger. He meant it as a protest, but even as he said it, he understood he had already lost the argument. He had seen enough of servants' hands, worn from work not yet 25 years old, to know precisely what those coins had cost her. Her gaze moved briefly to the doll. Then think of it as being for the little girl. The grocer wrapped the doll and the biscuits with the brisk efficiency of a man relieved the matter was settled. By the time Nathaniel turned to thank her properly, to ask, at the very least, her name, she had gathered her basket and was already through the door, the bell above it still swinging on its hook. He stepped out after her. The lane was full, carts, baskets, a dog weaving between ankles, the ordinary chaos of a market morning, and she was nowhere in it. Gone, as completely as if the street had simply closed over her. She had no idea she had just paid for a duke. And Nathaniel knew he had to find her again. 1 hour earlier. He had left Wycliffe Hall dressed more plainly than usual, a dark coat, nothing at his throat to announce him, no carriage waiting at the door. His steward would manage whatever needed managing that morning. There had seemed no reason to carry a purse for a walk he had taken 100 times before. He had not gone far past the grocer's window when he saw her, a girl of perhaps 8, her dress patched at the hem, her boots a size too large, standing very still before the glass. Her whole attention was fixed on the same small painted doll. "Do you like her?" he asked, stopping beside the child. She startled, then recovered with a composure that struck him as far too old for her years. "I'm only looking, sir. I don't expect to have her." "No? My mother takes in washing. We manage well enough." She said it the way children repeat things they have heard said to comfort themselves. He crouched, so as not to loom over her. "Your father?" "Gone, sir. 2 winters now. No complaint in it. No plea." And it was that, the complete absence of asking, that lodged itself somewhere beneath his ribs and did not move. He learned her name. He learned, without quite meaning to press for it, enough of where she lived to find the house again. Then she remembered her errand and hurried off, casting one last look at the window before she turned the corner. What debt does a man owe a child who has asked him for nothing at all? He carried the question with him into an hour of ordinary business, his steward waiting with a satchel of papers, 2 tenant representatives with concerns about a roof and a rent and a coming winter that promised to be hard on older bones. Nathaniel listened more than he spoke, as he generally did, and settled what needed settling with the quiet, unremarkable ease of a man for whom problems were, as a rule, solved the moment he decided they should be. It should have satisfied him. It did not entirely. The girl at the window had asked for nothing, and that, more than any request could have, was the thing he found he could not set aside. So instead of returning to Wycliffe Hall, he walked back to the grocer's. Inside, he asked for the doll, and, some impulse he did not examine too closely, the biscuits besides. Only when the grocer named the sum did he reach for a purse that was not there. That was when the trouble began. That was the moment the watch came out, and the ring, and the refusals that followed each in turn, and the line of strangers behind him who watched a well-dressed man fail to produce 4 shillings. That was the moment Clara Bennett spoke. Afterward, once she had vanished into the crowded lane and he had searched both directions without result, he found the little girl on her mother's front step and placed the doll into her hands. Her face opened the way a window opens onto sudden light. Her mother wept and thanked him more times than he could count, and thanked him again, and would have gone on thanking him if he had let her. He should have felt only satisfaction. He told himself, walking back toward the green, that he did. And yet, was it the doll he could not stop turning over in his mind? Or was it the woman who had made the giving of it possible? She had paid without a moment's hesitation, without his name, without the smallest expectation of thanks, and she had done it, he was certain now, with coin she could not spare. That certainty would not release him. He stood at the edge of the market road long after there was any reason to, looking toward the lane where she had disappeared, aware of something unfamiliar settling into place beneath his composure, not gratitude alone, though it was that too, but something closer to unease. The sense that a door had opened somewhere he had not been looking, and that he had already, without quite choosing to, stepped through it. He told himself he only wished to repay her. Deep down, he already knew that was not the only reason. 3 days passed, and Nathaniel Ashford found he could not put the matter to rest. He told himself, each morning, that the matter in question was simply a debt owed, a few shillings, easily repaid, easily forgotten once settled. But the explanation grew thinner each time he offered it to himself, and by the 4th morning he had stopped offering it at all. What is a man to make of a stranger who occupies more of his thoughts than his own household accounts? He returned to the market town at roughly the hour he had first come, dressed plainly again, a purse in his coat this time, heavy enough to settle any debt twice over. The grocer looked up as the bell rang and offered a small, knowing smile. "Back again, sir. Remembered your money this time, I hope." "I have," Nathaniel said, and let the man believe that was the whole of his purpose. It was not. He lingered near the shelves longer than any errand required, long enough that the grocer began to watch him with open curiosity, long enough that Nathaniel himself began to wonder if he had imagined the entire encounter, if she had been some trick of the morning light, gone as completely as she had first appeared. Then the bell rang again, and she was there. She did not see him at first. She moved toward the counter with a small list in hand, naming soap, thread, a paper of pins for her mistress, and it was only when she turned that her eyes found him and went still. "You," she said. "Miss," he stopped, realizing he had never learned it. "I'm afraid I don't know your name." "Clara Bennett." She said it carefully, as though testing whether she ought to have given it at all. "Nathaniel Ashford." He inclined his head. "I owe you a debt, Miss Bennett, and I intend to repay it." Her expression cooled at once. "I didn't help you expecting to be repaid." "I know. That is precisely why I intend to repay it." He held out the coins, the exact sum, counted twice before he left the hall, though he did not tell her that. "You cannot afford to lose what you gave me." "I can afford, quite easily, to give it back." She looked at the coins, and then at him, and something in her weighed the matter with more seriousness than 4 shillings ought to have required. "Very well," she said at last, and took them. "But only because it was mine to begin with, and not because you persuaded me of anything." Was that a victory, or merely the appearance of one? He suspected, even then, that Clara Bennett rarely allowed a man to believe he had won an argument he had not, in fact, won. They walked out together, and outside, in the ordinary noise of the street, the conversation loosened. She asked whether the little girl had received the doll, and when he described the child's face, the way it had opened, he said, like a window onto sudden light, Clara's own face softened in a manner she seemed not entirely aware of. "Then it was worth spending," she said simply. He was struck, again, by how little praise she seemed to want for it. He had known women who gave to charity and spoke of little else for a fortnight after. Clara spoke of the doll and then, just as easily, moved on to some complaint about the price of thread. He did not tell her he was a duke. Ashford was, after all, a name respectable enough to explain his bearing without explaining too much of it, and Clara, sensibly, reasonably, assumed him some gentleman attached to a wealthy estate, a steward perhaps, or a landowner's son with time enough to walk about a market town on a weekday morning. He did not invent this life for himself. He simply did not correct her when she built it, brick by brick, out of nothing more than his coat and his manner of speaking. How long can a man let a lie stand, when he has never once spoken it aloud? Over the weeks that followed, they met again. And again. Sometimes he came to the village with deliberate purpose, timing his arrival to hers with a precision he would have been embarrassed to admit. Sometimes the meetings wore the appearance of accident, near the churchyard wall, along the lane where she walked between errands, once when she was returning breathless from some task with her basket half spilling its contents. Their talk grew easier, and then it grew personal. She told him she served as lady's maid at a neighboring house, and that a portion of her wages went home each month to a widowed mother and a younger brother who was, by her account, entirely too fond of trouble. Nathaniel listened, and did the arithmetic he had not thought to do before, and understood at last precisely what those coins at the grocer's had cost her. It was not a small sum carelessly spared. It was, very likely, money she had needed. That understanding did not fade. It deepened. He found, too, something he had rarely encountered in the whole of his adult life, a woman entirely unimpressed by him. Clara disagreed when she thought him wrong. She laughed, without apology, when he grew too solemn over some trifling point. She spoke to him, in short, as though rank meant nothing between them, because as far as she knew, it did not. "You gentlemen," she told him once, walking beside the churchyard wall, "believe you understand servants because you've lived beneath the same roof as one. You haven't the first idea." "Tell me, then," he said, genuinely curious. "What is it we're missing?" She considered the question seriously, as she considered most things. "You see us carry the trays and mend the fires, and you think that's the whole of it. You don't see the rooms we sleep in, or the wages that haven't risen in a decade, or old Mr. Pratt let go without a pension after 40 years because his hands shake too badly to carry a tea service. You don't see the children on some estates who'll never learn to read a word, because no one thought it worth the trouble to teach them. Was this what it meant to be seen clearly, to be told, plainly, everything one's own house had failed to notice? Even the Duke of Wycliffe, she added, with a faint, careless scorn of someone who had never expected the remark to reach its subject, has a name for being respectable. But respectable isn't the same as understanding how the rest of us live. Nathaniel found himself, absurdly, both amused and humbled to hear himself discussed so freely. And if you could say as much to him directly. Clara considered it, then smiled. I tell him to look below stairs occasionally. It might do him some good. He carried the words home that evening, and did not set them down again. Without telling her why, he ordered the servants' quarters at Wycliffe Hall inspected within the week. Wages were reviewed. Old Simmons, the groundskeeper whose hands had begun to shake nearly as badly as the Mr. Pratt of Clara's story, was given a pension he had not thought to ask for. Books and winter clothing found their way to the tenant children before the first frost. Nathaniel began, slowly, to see his own house the way Clara had described it, not as a place well run, but as a place that had, for years, simply not been looked at closely enough. Clara, for her part, had begun looking forward to their meetings in a manner she did not examine too closely either. She knew little of what occupied his days, only that something in his reserve suggested seriousness, and something beneath the seriousness suggested kindness, and that the space between those two things had become, without her quite deciding it should, a place she liked to be. It was on one such evening, walking back from the churchyard as the light began to soften, that she mentioned it herself. There's talk that Wycliffe is changing, she said. Servants there are being treated better than they were. Better wages. Old Simmons kept on, when everyone expected him turned out. Nathaniel kept his eyes on the lane ahead. Do you approve? Clara smiled, a small, private smile, as though she had solved some pleasant riddle. Perhaps the Duke is learning to look below stairs. Nathaniel said nothing. He only smiled back, carefully, and let her believe the smile meant nothing more than agreement. But beneath it, quietly, he understood something Clara did not yet know. The truth could not remain hidden forever. Several weeks passed, and the invitation that arrived at the neighboring house was addressed, as such invitations always were, to the mistress alone. Clara was not asked whether she wished to attend the charitable gathering at Wycliffe Hall. She was simply told to be ready, and to make herself useful and invisible in whatever order the evening required. She had never been inside the great house before. She had passed its gates 100 times, had glimpsed its chimneys above the trees from the village lane, but nothing in those distant impressions had prepared her for the reality of it, the sweep of the drive, the rows of tall windows blazing with candlelight, the sheer unbroken scale of stone that seemed to have been built for some purpose grander than mere living. What manner of world required a house this size simply to hold one family? Inside, it was worse. Or better, depending on how one measured such things, marble beneath her feet, portraits taller than she was, a staircase wide enough to march a regiment down in comfortable rows. Clara stood near the edges of the gathering, adjusting her mistress's shawl, doing precisely what she had been trained to do, which was to be present without being seen. It suited her well enough. She had grown accustomed, in smaller houses, to occupying that particular kind of space, near enough to be useful, far enough to be forgotten. She watched the guests move beneath the candlelight, their jewels catching the light in a manner that made her acutely conscious of her own plain grey dress, and told herself she felt nothing in particular about the distance between herself and them. It was, after all, only the truth of things. Then the room changed. It happened gradually and then all at once, conversation thinning at the edges, a stillness spreading outward like water finding its level, guests straightening as though some invisible hand had passed down the row and corrected each spine in turn. The senior servants near the staircase drew themselves up. Clara followed the turning of every head, the way one follows a sound rather than a sight, before she understood what she was looking for. He was there. Not the man in the dark, unremarkable coat she had come to know outside the grocer's window. Not the man who had listened to her opinions of gentlemen with an amusement he had never troubled to hide. This man wore black superfine and a cravat pinned with something that caught the candlelight, descending the staircase surrounded by stewards who moved half a step behind him, as though drawn by a current only they could feel. Every guest in the hall bowed or curtsied at once, a single unbroken motion, like grass bending beneath a wind Clara could not feel. "His Grace," said a voice near her elbow. One of the other servants offered without particular emphasis, as though the words required none. "The Duke of Wycliffe." Clara did not move. She could not have said, in that instant, whether her body had simply forgotten how. For several long seconds, she stood entirely still, trying and failing to reconcile the man on the staircase with the man who had asked, with such quiet sincerity, whether the little girl had liked her doll. Then his eyes found hers across the crowded hall, and in the space of a single held breath, she understood that he had already known, that this was not a discovery he was making alongside her, but one he had been carrying, silently, for weeks. How does a person continue breathing normally, when the ground beneath her has simply vanished? Clara felt the heat rise in her face and did not know whether it was shame or fury. Every conversation she had ever had with him rearranged itself in her memory, each word suddenly wearing a different meaning. She had criticized wealthy landowners to his face. She had told him, plainly, what she would say to the Duke of Wycliffe if she ever had the chance, had told the Duke of Wycliffe himself, without the smallest idea that she was doing so. Worse than the shame was the doubt that followed close behind it. Had he been amused? Had some part of him found it entertaining, these weeks of listening to a servant speak her mind freely, never once troubling to correct her? She turned away before he could reach her, and spent the remainder of the gathering at her mistress's side with a diligence that bordered on desperation, refusing to let her eyes drift anywhere near the staircase again. It was in a quieter passage near the garden doors, well after most of the guests had drifted towards supper, that he found her. "Clara." She did not turn immediately. "Your Grace." "Don't." The word came out rougher than he intended. "Not from you. Not after everything." She turned then, and her voice, when it came, was steady in a way that cost her considerable effort. "Why did you never tell me?" "Because the moment you learned it, you would have looked at me the way everyone else does." He took a step closer, then stopped himself. "You spoke to me without knowing my title. You disagreed with me. You laughed at me. I have not been spoken to that way in longer than I can remember, and I found I was not prepared to lose it. That was not yours to decide for me." The words landed exactly as she intended them to. He said nothing. "You had the luxury of pretending rank did not matter," Clara said. "I do not." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he understood, with a clarity that arrived far too late to be useful, that she was entirely correct. "If it becomes known that a servant encouraged the private attentions of a duke," she said, "I will be the one blamed for it. Not you. My employment could end tomorrow. My reputation could be ruined by supper. Your title will protect you from every consequence of this. Mine will protect me from nothing at all. What is a man's affection worth, if it cannot survive contact with the world she must actually live in?" Nathaniel felt, for the first time in the whole of the acquaintance, the full weight of what he had allowed himself not to see. He had treated the difference between them as a pleasant complication, a puzzle to be solved at his leisure, because he had never once been the person who stood to lose anything by it. "Our meetings must end," Clara said. "It is the only sensible thing to do." He did not argue. He wanted to, every instinct in him wanted to, but he understood, watching her walk back toward the gathering with her spine held very straight, that arguing would only prove precisely her point. The days that followed were difficult for them both, though neither knew how difficult they had been for the other. Word traveled quickly through drawing rooms, as it always did, and within a fortnight Nathaniel found himself seated across from a great-aunt who informed him, with the particular bluntness reserved for elderly relatives, that fascination was one thing and marriage quite another, and that he would do well to remember the difference before he made a fool of himself over a lady's maid. She is not beneath respect simply because she earns her bread, Nathaniel said, and was surprised by the steel in his own voice. He did not send for Clara. He did not attempt to win her back with gifts, or letters, or any of the easy remedies available to a man of his fortune. Instead, quietly, without any expectation that she would ever know of it, he continued what he had already begun: the wages, the pensions, the winter clothing for children who would otherwise have gone without. He did it because it was right, not because anyone was watching, and in that continuation he found the only proof he had to offer her. When they met again, some weeks later, it happened openly, in daylight, where anyone might see. "I will not ask you to hide," he told her. "You were right. I could treat the distance between us as a small inconvenience, because I was never the one who stood to be ruined by it. I understand that now." Clara studied him for a long moment, searching, it seemed, for some sign that his understanding might prove as temporary as her doubts had feared. She did not find it. "There is one more thing I must ask of you," Nathaniel said. "One final meeting. Not here. Not at Wycliffe Hall, and not at any place grand enough to remind either of us what I am." "Where, then?" He held her gaze, steady now in a way he had not managed since the staircase. "The grocer's shop. Where all of this began." Clara returned to the market town on a morning that felt, in every particular, like the one that had begun it all: the same soft light along the cobbles, the same bustle of carts and baskets, the same small bell she could already hear in her memory before she had even reached the door. Nathaniel was waiting outside the grocer's shop, dressed plainly again, as though the black superfine and the pinned cravat had belonged to some other man entirely. How strange, that a single doorway could hold the whole of a story within it. "You came," he said. "You asked." He held the door for her, and the bell rang exactly as it had before. Inside, the shop looked smaller than she remembered, though nothing about it had changed: the same shelves, the same jars of preserved fruit, the same counter where a small painted doll had once sat beyond his reach. The doll itself was gone now, sold long ago to some other child's mother, but the counter remained, and so did the memory of standing before it. The grocer looked up, saw who had entered, and very nearly dropped the ledger in his hands. He had heard the rumors, of course, as everyone in the market town had by now, but hearing a thing and standing before it were evidently not the same. "Your Grace." He came around the counter so quickly he nearly upset a stack of parcels, bowing with a deference so complete it bordered on comic. "Forgive me, I hadn't. Is there anything I might—" "Whatever you require, of course, whatever you—" "Nothing today," Nathaniel said, not unkindly. "We only wished to look in." The man bowed again, and again, until Clara had to look away to keep from smiling. It was not lost on her, the small, sharp irony of it. This same counter, this same man, had once refused a gold watch worth more than the shop itself, because he had not known the stranger before him. Now he could not bow low enough for a purse that had, on that first morning, been entirely empty. They walked out together into the lane, and for a while neither spoke. The silence was not uneasy. It had the quality of a held breath before something important. "I want to tell you what that morning meant to me," Nathaniel said at last. "Not the version I've told you before. The whole of it." Clara said nothing, only walked beside him and waited. "I had a gold watch in my pocket. A signet ring on my hand. A cravat pin worth more than most men earn in a year. I had land, and houses, and horses, and a fortune large enough that I have genuinely lost count of its precise sum." He glanced at her. "And not one particle of it could buy a wooden doll for a child who had never asked me for anything at all." "I remember," Clara said quietly. "You had none of that. A servant's wages, and not even the whole of those, a portion sent home before you ever saw it." He stopped walking, and so did she. "And yet you were the one who could give. Freely. Without a moment's hesitation, for a stranger whose name you did not even know. What is a fortune worth? set beside a single act of fortune cannot purchase. You thought you were buying a doll for a child, Nathaniel said. You were changing my life. Clara felt something tighten in her chest, though she could not have named it precisely as sorrow or joy. Before you, he went on, generosity cost me nothing. I gave because I had so much that giving was never a sacrifice, merely an arrangement of numbers that made no difference to my own comfort. You taught me what it looks like to give something you actually need. I have not forgotten it. I do not intend to. He reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull away. I am not asking you to be hidden, Clara. Not a secret arrangement, not some quiet companion tucked away from scrutiny. I am asking you to be my wife. For a long moment, Clara could not speak at all. She had imagined, in some private and unguarded corner of her heart, that he might say such words eventually. She had not imagined how completely they would undo her when he did. You cannot mean that, she managed finally. I have never meant anything more entirely in the whole of my life. I am a servant, Nathaniel. I empty basins. I mend hems. I have curtsied to duchesses my whole life without once imagining myself becoming one. Her voice caught, and she pressed on before it could fail her completely. They will laugh at me. Behind gloved hands, in every drawing room in the county, they will laugh, and it will not stop after a fortnight, it will follow me for the rest of my life. I will spend every day afraid of saying the wrong word, holding the wrong fork, forgetting some rule I was never taught. I will lose myself trying to become a woman I was never meant to be. Could love truly survive such a transformation, or would it be buried somewhere beneath the effort of it? I am not asking you to become another woman, Nathaniel said, and there was nothing careless in how he said it. I do not want a duchess assembled out of etiquette and borrowed manners. I want Clara Bennett. The woman who paid for a stranger's doll because a child deserved a gift, and never once asked for thanks. The woman who told a duke, without knowing she was speaking to one, that he ought to look below stairs occasionally. The woman who made me examine not merely how much I gave, but how I lived. He held her hand more firmly. I am not asking you to leave her behind. I am asking her to stay, precisely as she is, for the rest of both our lives. Clara looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had once stood helpless before a counter, unable to buy the smallest thing that mattered, and felt whatever resistance remained in her finally give way. Yes, she said. Then, yes. There was no ring produced with a flourish, no crowd gathered to witness it, only the quiet lane, the shop bell still faintly audible somewhere behind them, and the steady certainty of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of doorways. What followed was not so simple as a wedding announced and celebrated without complication. There was gossip, as there always is, whispers in drawing rooms, a few doors that remained pointedly closed to her, remarks made just loudly enough to be overheard. Nathaniel acknowledged her openly regardless, refusing every suggestion that she be introduced quietly, gradually, as though she were something requiring careful concealment. Clara left her position with her head held high, thanked properly by her former mistress, rather than slipping away as though service itself were a thing to be ashamed of. Her mother's circumstances eased considerably, and her brother found himself apprenticed to a trade he had once thought entirely beyond his reach, but Clara never forgot, not for a single day, precisely where she had come from. Nathaniel continued what Clara had first set in motion, long before either of them understood what it would become. Wages rose. Pensions held. Old retainers were kept on rather than quietly dismissed. Children on the estate learned their letters, and none went without a coat come winter. And Clara, now Duchess of Wycliffe in name though never in manner, gave her particular attention to servants' welfare, to widows managing on little, to children who reminded her, again and again, of a girl outside a grocer's window. It was that same girl, in fact, who visited Wycliffe Hall some months later, brought by her mother to thank the Duke properly for a kindness neither of them had forgotten. She still carried the doll. Its paint had worn thin in places now, the blue of the dress faded at the seams, one painted eye softened by years of careful handling, the unmistakable evidence of a thing that had been loved rather than merely kept. Nathaniel noticed it at once, and something in his expression shifted, gentle and unguarded. Clara noticed him noticing, and reached, without quite deciding to, for his hand. Neither of them said anything. Neither needed to. A duke had once possessed nearly everything in the world and could not pay for one small gift. A servant had possessed almost nothing and had given freely all the same. Neither of them had understood, on that ordinary spring morning, that a few coins spent on a stranger's behalf would go on to alter the whole of both their lives, quietly, completely, and forever. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable Regency romance. Your support means so much.